So, Christine, so happy to connect. I'm glad that you took the time. And as we are talking about before recording, I think today for me it's going to be a big focus on product, just product management. What is it? What is it? So, selfishly, I just want to understand the role better and understand that function. So, maybe a first, hopefully easy question is: how do you define the role of a product manager? What does that person do?
That's a great question. And it's not an easy question, actually, because I think depending who you ask, you get a lot of different answers. But that's what makes product management so wonderful, is that it's actually a lot of different things rolled into one. I like to define it as a very simple way, basically just being the glue between the business side and the tech side of a company. So, I spend some significant amount of time in the Bay Area where it's very engineering and tech driven, and there's a lot of good ideas there. But sometimes somebody needs to think like, who's going to use this? What's the value? How is this commercializable? So that's a big role of the PM. And then when I'm working more in companies that are a bit more business focused, where more marketing driven and where they really know what market they want to go to, then I find the PM can become a bit more technical and help understand, do we want to really build this from scratch? Do we want to buy, borrow, etc.? So I find the role is really at the intersection of the two, and making the two work together to bring the most value for the business.
Yeah. How is the role judged then? Right. So like how do you gauge success of the role?
Depending on the level, I think product should be accountable for it. If you're in a product driven company and you're the head of product, you should be measured on the revenue generated by the product. When we are in more sales kind of driven companies and things like that, you can go closer to the product and use adoption metrics, number of users, or things that are closer to the technology that you're building. But ultimately, a successful product manager is growing a company. A company should have more users, more revenue.
Okay. Okay. Very, very good answer. Right. If the product's working, right, that means someone's doing something right. Uh,
Exactly, and you shouldn't build something nobody is using. So if the revenue is not coming as a product manager, you should be asking yourself, am I really solving a problem that deserves to be solved?
how did you get interested? Like, how did you like stumble upon like the function and the being a product manager?
Yeah, that's another great question, because in my experience now, all the product managers I know have a completely different story. I think it's not something that was very popular back when we were in school. People became engineers, but nobody was really talking about product management. So for me, it was mostly at Google. So and I worked as a consultant mostly in the beginning of my career. So I was a bit more on the strategic side, but having a master's in math, I'm always very averse in the quant side of the modeling and the business modeling. So I was very kind of quantitative business person. And when I started at Google, I was a researcher. So I was analyzing the data and providing recommendations to the product team. And what was interesting there is working with them and offering recommendations and seeing how sometimes in the data for the user, there was a very clear problem. And for me as a researcher, it was like, why isn't this on the roadmap next quarter? Everybody says this is the biggest problem. But what you hear when you are more exposed with product managers, there's a lot of other things to consider. So what's the strategy of the business? What kind of market we want to be in? And it was basically just we could say out of frustration, maybe, of like doing a lot of recommendations and never quite seeing them on the roadmap as much as I wanted. And I said, hey, this job looks even more interesting. I could be the recipient of this data and be making the strategy and the decisions about where we want to go based on that data. So that's kind of how I slowly made my way onto the product side at Google and transferred this way.
Yeah, and I think Google's known. I think Google and Twitter, if I go back down like tech history, were really like when I say the companies that ended up being huge pioneers in the creation of this role, because it's not it's been around 20 years, like not even right, like
Yeah,
15. I
not
want to
even.
say.
Yeah,
Um,
probably like, yeah, 15 years sounds about right.
do you get to like? I'd be curious, Christine. Do you meet a lot of young people asking you like kind of the same questions, like how do I get into it? What is it like? Do you give advice and like mentorship to people looking to join?
That is probably like coming from the more, like the emerging leaders, like people coming out of school, et cetera. That is probably the question I get the most often. How do I become a product manager? And it comes from developers who are, who have leadership and are interested in coming out of their code and working on something a little more strategic. And it comes also from marketing people with tech savviness. So everybody wants to know. So yeah, sorry, I lost the question. We're gonna
What
have to
do
edit that.
yeah, it was about advice you give to people that want to learn and get how to get into it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a question I get a lot, for those reasons I just mentioned. And basically, what I tell them is try to find, well, first of all, like, you've got to make sure people understand what it is, because a lot of people will say I want to be a product manager, but then when you say why, if the answer is a little bit outside of the scope of the function, the first thing I do is kind of reality check of, do you really know what you're getting into? Because being the product manager, as all product managers know, does not mean you will be the CEO of the product and making all the decisions by yourself, and the product will do, like, the developers will build exactly what you want them to do in the timelines that you like. That is absolutely not the role. So usually I kind of try to burst a little bit the bubble and see if there's a really deep down desire of building something that really solves problem. And when that's there, then it's a lot easier to move into it from there, because then the next step is, well, how does this apply to your work today? Everything we use and do is, you can think of it as a product. You're doing an internal document for people to read. That's a product. How are you going to make, who is the document for? How are you going to make it easy for them to grasp the content? What kind of call to action is there at the end? When you send an email asking to review a document, you're essentially a product manager of that document, trying to get people to engage with it. So I just try to help people see how they can exercise their product management muscles in the stuff that they do on a daily basis, and slowly expand into taking on projects that are more and more product related.
Yeah. What's the biggest misconception? Like, what do people think the role is, but that it's not?
The being the CEO of the product thing, I think, comes a lot. Um, People really think the product manager makes all the decisions, a bit in a silo. Like, oh, I have a lot of ideas, so I should be a product manager because, like, I have a lot of product ideas. And I'm going to be very honest. Like, creativity is probably not even in my strength. I wouldn't even like. Sorry, we're gonna. Sorry.
That's all good. That's all good. You go check it.
People think, like, it's a big misconception. People think they have to have a lot of ideas and they're going to be, putting all these features in a product, and they're so creative. And it's a misconception, because at the end of the day, you're trying to look at the data of what your user is doing, and you're trying to offer more value and a better experience to that user. So your user is really telling you what they want and what they don't want. And you need to be very humble and very open to feedback, and not just your user feedback telling you your product sucks, but also, feedback from the sales team saying, like, hey, why don't you build this? We would make more money. And the dev team saying, why don't we build this? Like, we need this in the back end. So it's a role where you have to be really good at saying no to a lot of things, and having your focus so clear that you can explain it to those around you where you want to go. Then you go there together based on the data analysis.
Yeah. The way I understand the role, and I love for you to challenge, like, the maybe the, like, too simple way I see it, is really three skills. It's like, one is like understanding product, like the tech side, without necessarily needing how to code, but you need to understand how the sausage is made. And then the second piece is like the business side. So it's like understanding how the product gets commercialized, like the traction with users. And the third angle is one of influence, or of coercion is maybe the better word, right? So how do you convince engineers to do something? So using the right arguments to convince a group of engineers or convince a group of salespeople. Is that maybe too simplistic a way to describe the skills needed?
I like it. It's pretty exhaustive. Maybe it depends. I mean, definitely you got to like, when you say understanding how products are made, you are in that job. You're facing a lot of engineers and developers. So for sure, you have to understand how it's made to some extent. That's that's required. But I don't think you need too much of it. Not as much as people. I get a lot of people being like, "Oh, but I don't have a software engineering degree. I don't think I can be a PM in a SaaS company." And my engineering degree is in industrial engineering. It's more like operations. So it's more around like I would say it's more around how much do you need to know. And that's a strategic skill on its own, recognizing when you need to know more and when you know enough to be comfortable in that space and be able to get what you want to get done. So for me, the strategic mindset of the product manager is probably the single most important thing, and it cascades down to all the things you mentioned. Being able to understand how this will be commercialized on the business side, what are all the different marketing tactics that we can use for go to market, and then being able to influence and convince and motivate others. So yeah, those three make sense to me, and maybe I would add a layer on top of that of like being strategic about each of these things rather than seeing them as a checklist.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes
So
sense.
having a view, a more strategic view, I think that's a very good point. I want to maybe switch gears. I want to come back to product, and I think I also want to talk about APM and your role in APM. But I want to talk about you a little bit, if that's okay, Christine. So you came back from the Valley, you joined this company called Heyday that was been in the news recently. So walk us through maybe just a personal decision to join Heyday, and then of course, what the company does, maybe for people that are not familiar with it.
Absolutely. So you're right. I was in the Bay Area for a few years, 5 6 years, and I got to a point at Google where I felt like I had accumulated a lot of knowledge, and I don't say this very often, but at that point in my career, I had some level of confidence that I could do more and I could go further, and um, I had a call to a pull, from home, being like, Canada is a fantastic place to live, and there's a lot of tech here that is has a lot of potential, but is kind of I don't maybe I could use the word like underdeveloped. And I had a strong sense of calling to come and take what I had um, accumulated and bring that home and help the people here leverage that. So what I was looking for mostly was a fun group of people where I can be myself and I can have a good time, all while I can stretch myself and kind of fill in a gap in a company where they need somebody like me, somebody who knows how to do the things I know how to do. So with Heyday, the fit was really perfect because that company was founded by four great men. Three of them are software engineer, and one of them is a brand marketing guy. So you can see there's a huge hole right there for a product person to come and tie this vision and this execution together. So that's kind of how I picked that, and they were in an interesting stage as well, like having already done the proof of concept MVP kind of stage and looking to when I joined, they had just gotten the seed round, and it was basically time to make the company ready for a Series A, which turned into an acquisition in the end, which was great news for us. But it was kind of our play to yeah, it felt like an interesting challenge, like, okay, you've got a year or two worth of money and you got to make this work and make something greater out of this. So that's kind of what took me there.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. And yeah, you mentioned acquisition, right? So it's like in the news, obviously, Hootsuite acquiring a Heyday for a pretty good amount. I think great win for obviously for the guys with Steve and the gang, for yourself, and I think also for the market as a whole, right? Showing that hey, maybe we're not that underappreciated, right? We can build some pretty cool technology here as well. So Heyday, from my understanding, is building conversational AI, which fits with what Hootsuite does, right, in terms of their broader offering. So maybe just explain Heyday's offering a bit better than than I just
Oh,
did.
yeah,
What they
absolutely.
do, the value prop.
Yeah, yeah. And when we talk about our challenges later, I think one of our challenges is being able to tell it in a very concise way everybody can understand, because it is still quite complex. But basically, you can think of Heyday as the next version of the support desk tools. So a lot of people out there have phone and email for support, and they use players, like Zendesk and large players, just to receive volumes of customer queries. And at Heyday, we believe people want a more conversational experience. And when they're looking for support, they want something that's a bit more convenient and on their own terms and their own channels. So chat is very popular as a support channel. So when the company started, it was mostly chat for support. What we found very, very quickly, though, is that all sorts of people come to the website for shopping and browsing and not just support. And um, it's a lonely place to be on a website. It's kind of like being in the warehouse. We're in the retail area, right? So you're not in a store when you're in the website. You're in the warehouse. Like everything is there. You got to find it yourself. Good luck if you're not too sure what you're looking for, because there's a lot of products in there. So people started to turn to the chat for help. Like, hey, I'm just gonna start biking. What's the best bike for somebody like me? How much should I pay for it, etc. So that if you're using a support tool with email and canned responses, all those kinds of questions don't exist. But as soon as you open the chat, that starts to appear. And so we pivoted a little bit from being mostly support to being support in sales, and the integrations that we do with the e-com platforms to allow to send products in chat and be able to really have that discussion one-on-one where I'm helping you find the right product for you. It became more of a virtual shopping experience. So we're at the intersection of support and virtual shopping. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And the AI is there to automate a lot of the support queries and also to help pre-qualify the person who's shopping and helping them find what they need. So it serves both purposes. And the magic with Hootsuite is that this experience that I just described is pretty powerful on a website, but it's even more powerful in a mobile app. Or if you think about it, for somebody like Hootsuite, if you're on Instagram and you're chatting with the brand, or on Facebook, WhatsApp, and then all these other channels that are popping up. So the play with Hootsuite now is to merge basically the e-com and the retail experience that we have developed with their social channels and their aggregation of channels. That way you can have that same Heyday experience that you would have on your website on all these channels for everybody, both in the private and in the public sector. Because now when you're in social on Twitter, you start to have posts and comments and not just direct messages.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think it goes in line too with where, like, if you look at the product roadmaps of, like, the big social networks, right, of like an Instagram, it's a lot of it is focused on e-commerce, right?
Yep.
So being able to integrate with these tools and provide features, I think we're just at the start of what's possible and understanding that space. In your role of heading a product, what do you see as the biggest like challenge you face? Like you said, part of it is marketing. It's like the convincing people. Curious to hear what else you see as a challenge.
Yeah, it's well, being in the AI space, one of the most basic challenges we have is explaining AI to people. And I think there was a bit of a honeymoon phase with AI where it was a buzzword for a while, and now people have kind of came down from that bubble. So real AI is extremely powerful and scalable and relevant, but it can sometimes be misinterpreted by some of our prospects as like basic keyword matching or things like that. Like for some customers, it's hard to understand really the difference. So we show it in action as much as we can, and that helps with that. But I would say really explaining, and even when I was saying it just a little bit earlier, I'm talking about like support on the chat and sales. That's not necessarily intuitive for everybody. It really helps to have stories and to show examples, but explaining how, for your customer, it's just one door. It's just one place. It's the same store. It's the same door. And let the AI do the automation and routing and all that work for you. So explaining that, I think, is a challenge of its own. And so the AI and the marketing of being able to explain that in a three-word ad.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, yeah. So it's really cool to have seen, obviously, the story of Heyday and what you guys are doing. Maybe talk a little bit. I want to go back to product for a bit, if that's okay. You also started something called APM Montreal. So maybe for the audience, like, what is APM Montreal? What are you looking to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for asking that. It's one of my proudest accomplishments to date, I would say. So we're talking earlier about how a lot of people wonder how they can get into product management. And this is for this group. So APM, for the listeners, stands for Associate Product Manager. And it's basically the entry level role into product management. So what we do is we handpick like 15 companies in each cohort, and each company sends an APM and a mentor. And through the course of the program, which lasts about 20 weeks, the APMs have 20 classes. So they have a weekly class, and the mentors, because there's 15 of us, we can teach one or two classes each. So it's not too much of a burden. It's really community based. It's all volunteers. So for the APMs, it's hugely impactful because over the 20 weeks, they really learn to become stronger product managers. And my hope with that program is that we make product management more accessible to everybody, people of all backgrounds who are interested in getting started, and that we encourage the ecosystem in Montreal to give chances to more junior product managers. Because, if everybody's looking for a PM that did 5 years at Google and just moved back to Montreal, like that's a high a bar for recruitment. Like we got to give chances to people who have the right skills we were talking about before, like strategic thinking, understands tech, understands the commercial aspect, has some influencing DNA. It's like, all right, like you just need to learn a bit more the core concepts of product management, and you can do wonders with that. So that's a little bit the idea. And for us in Montreal, it's been fun also to group the mentors together, because now we're also creating a community of product management leaders as well. So that's been also really rewarding for everybody to get to know each other and network.
Well, that's it. Yeah, like you said, there's not like a million, product managers. So like having a tight knit community, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Isaac's been involved, and I see his,
Yeah.
his hands all over this. And like, as having gone to his product tank meetups, that in the old world of like pre-COVID, like at Donman House, just going and sitting down learning about product. I think that was super fun.
Yeah,
Are
and
you guys
maybe
going to
I
start?
could. Sorry, I just want to add, because now you mentioned Isaac, and there's a lot of people behind this program. So by all means, like I don't want to take all the credit for it, and it was strongly inspired by APM Toronto. So a huge shout out to APM Toronto, who helped us get started and shared with us like how they did it. So with Isaac, and there's actually Ed and Laura. So there's 4 of us in Montreal that got this started together. So it's a great team to be part of.
Yeah, for APM, what's the best way to get involved? Like, do you guys have a website? Is it just like a social media? Like, if one of people want to know and like go to the next event?
Yeah, we have so right now we're actually, it's perfect timing. Right now we're recruiting for our second cohort that's going to start in February. So we have a landing page, but I think the easiest is probably for people to follow us on LinkedIn. There's APM Montreal on LinkedIn, and that's where we post updates like when we're recruiting for a new cohort, etc. And I think our landing page is linked from there too.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Maybe if it's okay with you, Christine, I'd like to zoom out about and talk about the role a bit at a higher level. It feels like the world's getting more complex, particularly when it comes to product. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how do you see the role evolving, considering this increased complexity? Do you just see more people having to work in the field and like having more specializations? Is that even the right frame to look at it? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how you see it progressing.
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 things that are going to happen probably. One of the things that's happening right now, I'm already seeing it, is there's new types of roles that are emerging. So after product management, now like I'm seeing more and more like product marketing, product operations as well. So there's kind of parallel roles that are going to be created to segment essentially all the work that a product manager needs to do. Another trend that I'm seeing, at least in Montreal and on my team, is everybody has to wear a product management hat. Even if you're a designer, you're a writer, you're a researcher, it doesn't matter, right? Like everybody needs to be thinking a bit more like a product manager in terms of, is this a big problem? Do I want to spend time on this? Is this a priority? What does the data say? What does the customer say? So I think the evolution of product management is probably like companies become more and more product driven as a culture generally, and then these specialized roles start to happen. The other thing that we've already been seeing in the industry is that there's different types of product managers. So some are more like growth product managers that are very good with like the free trials and the SaaS and growing something from small to big. And then there's other product managers that are more technical and they're more in the enterprise world and the world of APIs and how do we open up for agencies to do custom work on our behalf on our platform. So I think, as the field evolves, different types of functions, sub functions appear as well.
Maybe a selfish question. Besides Heyday, of course, what other organizations do you see as like really being leaders in product? Like where you look at their product, and you're like, man, they're really well run as product organizations. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I gotta say, Google was very strong. I like Shopify a lot. I think they have a great product, and the way they've been thinking about it and pivoting and opening up more in retail and in the finance sector. It's very interesting. Um, to come out of the e-com space a little bit and speak about other spaces. Yeah, sorry. I
I think
wasn't
it's
prepared for
fine. I
the
think those
question.
those two are pretty solid already. So
I wasn't prepared for that question. Sorry. Yeah.
honestly, I thought of it on the fly, and I'm like, oh wow! Like, while I got you, but I asked that question selfishly. Um, Yeah, I think those were two really good examples, Christine. And yeah, I think we'll probably come up with like a dozen. But yeah, Shopify in particular, like I think you mentioned, they seem to be crushing it at a whole level, other level. Maybe that leads me to maybe a final question or two is how do you think about velocity and like this notion of speed, right? So like I think one of the things that makes Shopify special, you look at their cycles, and it seems like there's a new release like every other week. And it seems like many organizations are just cranking out new features and like so yeah, curious to hear your thoughts on velocity.
This is my favorite question of all the questions you asked. Tell me if you agree with this, but I think it's a question of focus. So the speed thing, like it's the same amount of features that everybody's doing. Probably everybody's working just as hard. But why do some people appear to be going faster is because they're all going to the same place at the same time and they're not going to five different places. They're just going to, X. Um, and I try to bring that in as much as I can at Heyday. We do the support sales, we have different channels, we have an inbox, we have a chat widget. There's a lot of different parts. But how we try to keep focus is, well, first of all, we use OKRs. So objective and key results. They're a very popular framework that was widely used at Google that I copied over at Heyday. But basically, OKRs help us get focused. And from a roadmap and product strategy perspective, I also try to give each quarter a spin on something. For example, right now we're in Q4. It's back to school. It's Thanksgiving, Black Friday. It's Christmas. Like it's a big season for retailers. Their volume is going to spike. So right now, the focus on the roadmap was more in terms of agent productivity and what are the quick wins that we can do that will help alleviate this incoming traffic that we know is coming. So that was like our Q4. In Q1, we know sales are going to slow down. That's where we want to revisit a little bit our stack where we're doing sales attribution and pushing for more sales in the chat, because that will be like a good time to try new things and have people adopt them. So I try to follow this seasonality, and based on where we are in our business cycle, I try to give a focus. So even if you are in a company where you feel like your product is trying to do too many things at once, that is okay, especially in the beginning, because it's true, you don't really know where you're going. You have to try things. So I think speed comes from being intentional, essentially. Why am I trying this? What's my goal here? Am I on track, yes or no? And if not, what's the next goal? Like, how do I move away from this onto the next thing? And this only works if you're very transparent with people. And that would be like a whole hour of discussion on talking about how to be transparent and not noisy and all of that. But that's very, very important.
I love that. I love that answer, Christina. It goes back to, I think, one of the insights you shared before about being strategic and like thinking about it while, versus like running, So with,
Yeah.
whether, the chicken without a head expression. You said, we could probably talk for another hour. I want to be respectful of your time. Maybe a final question is, where can people reach out, connect with you, learn more about Heyday and Hootsuite?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So Christine Dupuis is my LinkedIn, and yeah, that's the best way. Reach out, don't hesitate. I always love
Awesome.
connecting with new people, and especially since it's only been a couple of years. I'm back in Montreal, so it's been great to reconnect with everybody. Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Christine.
thank you.